Good evening and welcome to For the Record. Fiji has often punched above its weight in international affairs, and in November will add another feather to its international diplomacy cap when it officially takes on the presidency of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, commonly known as the Conference of the Parties, or COP23. Here at home, the government has just launched the country's first ever National Climate Change Week. Joining me this evening to discuss Fiji's goals on climate change at both the international and local scene is the Acting Prime Minister, Attorney General, and Minister responsible for climate change, Mr. Ayaz Said Koyum. Thank you for joining me on the show.
Thank you, Sam.
So, despite your various portfolios, we are talking climate change specifically tonight, and National Climate Change Week. First time we're having it. Why are we having it, and what are we trying to achieve?
Well, certainly Climate Change Week is a week-long series of events and activities to essentially raise awareness about climate change, the effects of climate change, and what we do need to work together and come together as a nation, and indeed as a global family, to try and stop the terrible effects of climate change, and to raise that awareness in a way that people take some very practical examples away from this week-long of activities.
So, accelerating climate action for a resilient Fiji. Why was this theme chosen for our first week?
Well, essentially, I mean, you know, the reality is that climate change has had an enormous impact on our lives. A lot of people may not realize it, but of course things like Cyclone Winston was quite very much in your face type of climatic event. And as we know that Winston itself did a number of unusual things in terms of the intensity,
how it behaved, the way it sort of moved around, the way it lingered within the country. And it was the second strongest storm recorded ever to hit landfall in the world until recently. And of course, just digressing slightly, you see the current cyclones in the Caribbean is one after the other sort of following and causing widespread damage and
too.
All big ones.
Absolutely. So that's obviously been there. That's more in your face. But then there are other subtle things that are happening. The rising sea levels. We've already moved 3 villages to higher ground. One is Vunindongoloa village in Dakondrove, Tukuraki village in Ba, Denimanu village in Nyandu Island. These villages actually physically had to be relocated because the water is coming into the areas where they traditionally didn't.
So these are some key impacts, visible impacts that we can see.
Yes, and some of them, I mean, there are cane farmlands in Vanuatu, where because the waters are coming in, a lot of the soil is getting, a lot of salt. So you no longer can, salinity levels are getting high, so you no longer can actually plant there. These are the very sort of subtle things that are actually obviously happening, which may not be big as a cyclone. So it is having an enormous impact. I mean, some people are saying, look, there are certain fish that actually does not come out anymore because of the ocean temperatures heating. There are, reefs that are actually being bleached because of the heat in the water, and also the way that the currents are also changing because of things like climate change. So these are a number of issues that are actually impacting upon our daily lives. There are, of course, droughts also, unpredictable droughts now, or droughts sort of lingering around. It also means when do you actually now, certain crops you could plant at a particular point in time, you no longer can. So it has an impact, for example, on your food security, on agriculture. So we need to be aware about this.
Now, sometimes people, probably don't care about things until it directly affects them. Yeah? So they think, oh, they're living in the coast. Yes. So someone in Suva, why should they care?
Well, obviously they should care about it because it can have an impact on the food that you're going to buy. There are certain levels of crops that won't be available. Of course, in respect of the food supply, including things like even fish, it can have an impact on that. Of course, a cyclone does not say we're not going to go to Suva. A cyclone can also come to Suva too. So these are numerous impacts. It has an enormous impact on everybody. Of course, it has an impact in other countries too, as seen from other countries. It can have an impact on employment also. It has an impact on health. It has an impact on, for example, in certain countries it affects the mortality rate of children. It has an impact because of food security. It has an impact on the manner in which people are nourished or become malnourished. It can cause famines.
It's a widespread and interlinked.
Absolutely, it's actually a global phenomenon. But of course, the reality about climate change is that it's not restricted to sovereign states. Because, for example, as we've seen through issues such as pollution in the ocean, if somebody does a nuclear test in one part of the world in the ocean, the radiation can come to our part. If somebody throws plastic in California, it comes into the Pacific Ocean and we throw it into the water. Similarly, if, for example, there's a lot of sort of industrial carbon emitted waste going into the air,
we all feel
it actually depletes the ozone layer. So more sunlight comes through, the ozone layer is depleted. It can then have an impact on us, even though it may be happening in other industrialized countries of the world. That's the issue about global phenomena. This is why the Paris Agreement was a very critical agreement.
That's in essence the core of the issue that we will be discussing about. That we all need collective action on this. No person can take it alone. So let's come back to National Climate Change Week. So let's discuss some of the activities. Where will be held, who will be involved, who is part of this?
Well, we want all Fijians to be part of it, but of course, been driven by the COP23 Secretariat that's been set up, of course, in Fiji for the past number of months. It's being celebrated from Friday, the 22nd of September to 29th of September 2017. It's for a week. We start off with a weekend of prayer this weekend. We also then we've engaged with various faith-based organizations. Then from...
yes, if I can just touch on that, because we got 90 seconds to go to the break. The PM went to visit some religions. He went to the Methodist Church conference. He went to various to really specifically get their involvement in this.
Sure.
So very quickly, how has that worked out? Have they come on board?
Well, we have a faith-based, interfaith-based grouping that has worked with the COP Secretariat to organize this sort of prayer messaging for this weekend to ensure that we actually pray towards not just our efforts in COP23, but overall in respect of our ability as a human race to be able to deal with this phenomena and to be able to give us the level of stewardship, the level of fortitude, the level of collaboration that we require.
Effective way to get to a wider audience.
Yeah, it's not just a question also, yes, about getting through the faith-based organization creating awareness, but also we need that sort of, human collaboration to be able to deal with this matter, because it does involve a lot of human beings coming to terms and coming to an agreement in the way forward. So Paris Agreement, like I was saying, was a fantastic success. Now it's the implementation of that.
Implementation, right.
Yes.
We will discuss the activities on National Climate Change Week when we get back after the break. Welcome back. You're watching For the Record. We're discussing the first ever National Climate Change Week. The theme is Accelerating Climate Action for a Resilient Fiji. So we were discussing some of the activities that to be taken place, and I understand each day next week has different themes. Monday, we're discussing environment and forestry.
Yes.
And this, the different aspects of climate change, as we discussed earlier, wide-ranging, interlinked, complex issues. So environment and forestry, then we move on to Tuesday on mitigation and private sector engagement. So just try and tie in what are we trying to do here?
Sure, I mean, the environment and forestry obviously is very important. I mean, one of the ways that you can actually mitigate some of the effects of climate change or to be able to deal with it is that you put more oxygen into the air, because the fact that you've got more carbon, and carbon obviously is more dangerous. For example, what we call the mangroves, from what we understand from some of the studies, it actually shows that mangroves actually has more of a oxygen footprint. So it releases more oxygen into the air, and its ability to suck in carbon actually is a lot greater. So, but then on the other hand, we have to create an awareness that, look, it's not a good thing to actually cut down the tiri-tiri or cut down the mangroves. People use it for dongo and all of that sort of stuff. So the idea, of course, is to ensure that we also have replanting. We need to become a lot more conscious about where we sit into the ecosystem. If, for example, you're going to throw out rubbish, willy-nilly into the ocean, it can actually kill fish life.
So a lot of these,
it can create a lot of damage to the environment, which ultimately has an impact on you.
Right. So a lot of this on Wednesday, water and coastal protection, traditional knowledge. Thursday will be agriculture, food security and fisheries, and Friday climate education. So there's a lot of awareness, and I just wanted to ask, do these things like designated weeks, like National Climate Change Week, how effective do you think these weeks will be? Because we've seen weeks like this for many issues in the past, and then it comes and goes and nothing. So after this National Climate Change, what then? What happens?
Well, we've never had a climate change week before in Fiji's history, so it's not like it's any other run-of-the-mill week. It's the first time we're having it, and obviously it fits in very well with the fact that we have the presidency of COP23, and there's a heightened level of consciousness amongst the young people. I think perhaps many of the older people may not necessarily have that level of consciousness. People in our high schools, even in primary schools, and even the youth of our country have more of a reality check on climate change. So we want their buy-in too, because as you know, our ability to mitigate the risks of climate change is about the future. You and I can sort of, do all the, emit all the carbon now and not really be concerned about it. But what are we doing for the future? Your children and our
Someone
children.
else will have to carry the burden.
Have to carry the burden. So, it's about the responsibility that we have in raising the level of consciousness. So I disagree with you that it's going to be just like another week. These days...
Well, my question is how it will not be like any other week.
Well, the fact of the matter is because for the first time we also got the presidency of a COP.
So
it ties in
very
well
high-profile role.
We've got a pre-COP that's happening. We've got a lot of high-profile people who are engaged. We expect a lot of high-profile people to be here on the 16th, 17th, and 18th of October.
Which we'll get to. I mean, Fiji will be in the hot seat, so to speak, and a very high-profile hot seat. So, the question, some people are we're engaging in a very high-profile international area that the PM will be. So to some those who argue, hey, why climate change? There's more pressing issues here at home. What about health issues? What about some of the other, fixing the roads and some of those other things? Why is climate change getting the attention it is getting now?
Well, firstly, the roads are not stopped being fixed. They're still being fixed. Just because we're focusing on climate change does not necessarily mean that the hospitals have stopped running. Things are still being renovated and being fixed up. New hospitals are being built. New doctors are being recruited. Nurses are getting a pay rise, so are the doctors. All of those things.
But is climate change getting more attention?
Well,
more
maybe.
Profile, more awareness?
Well, obviously it would if you've got the presidency of COP23. But just because it's got more of a media attention and you've decided to interview us on climate change, you have made the choice. It does not mean that the hospital system has stopped running. It does not mean that the nurses aren't getting the pay rise, the doctors aren't getting pay rise, or we're not getting new equipment. All of that is happening.
So what you say is climate change is just as important as all of this.
Yeah, but I think you also have to understand, if we're able to, address the issue of climate change. So, for example, if we come to an agreement, get a global agreement, we reduce we get the 1.5 degrees Celsius target that we want. If it has the ability to reduce climatic events, the hospitals, the roof that got blown away, the nurses' homes that got blown away, the health center roofs that got blown away, won't get blown away. So you can provide better health services, continued health services. So you have to understand this. Unfortunately, a lot of people, Stanley, including some politicians, tend to think in silos. We need to understand that all of these things, and climate change is an overarching issue,
all part of a broader picture.
It's all connected. I mean, reality is this. You can have fantastic roads, you can have a hospital. If you get 4 or 5 cyclones in a year, you get flooding in a year, all of them can get damaged in a day. It's gone.
All lead to waste.
Exactly. So let's fix up the symptoms of the problem.
Okay.
Not just try and provide a cure.
So while we're at let's talk about some of these. I mean, they exist internationally, and there's still some, perhaps in this country, that's climate skeptics. Those that still don't believe the science around climate change, they say it's not solid enough. What is Fiji's position on this? Those that see, we have our friend Donald Trump in the United States who sees it a hoax. There are people who say it's being pushed by countries both big and small for their own agenda. And for Fiji and Pacific countries, for instance, there are those articles I've read that they're saying, oh, these small states, all they're after is the adaptation funds, the money, looking for another pot of funding, that this is the main priority here. It's not really about the issues that you've raised. How can you convince, or what are your message to people who don't believe we're doing this for the right reasons?
I don't know which articles you're reading, Stanley.
Yeah, it's out there.
but look, the reality is that I think apart from one member of parliament who came out openly and said that he thought it was all not a a tangible issue. I don't think anybody else in Parliament has come out and said it's not a tangible issue, or that it's something that is irrelevant or it's a hoax. I think the reality is that most Fijians actually understand that climate change is actually a reality. If you talk to most Pacific Islanders, they know. I mean, talk to the people in Tuvalu and Kiribati. These are countries that actually could, in 40, 50 years' time, actually completely disappear under the waters. As you know, our Honourable Prime Minister has said we'll offer them a refugee status in our country. But the fact is that there are, yes, you are right, that there are some people offshore.
The climate change deniers,
who are climate change deniers. But as the Honourable Prime Minister's position has been in his numerous international statements, he said he'll reach out and work with everybody. Work out a solution, reach out to them, because sometimes I think people, there may have been people in Florida who may have been skeptics, for example, of cyclones.
They're starting to have a change of mind.
Exactly, in particular two of them hitting in succession, one after the other. So I think, we have to be able to understand that sometimes certain articles may get a bit of prominence, but the reality is most people are on board, and the rest of the world is on board. In countries like China, a very large sort of industrial output base, but they're also on board very much in respect of climate change.
So
and
no debate on the science.
They're also taking very concrete steps to mitigate some of the risks from climate change, and taking some mitigate, for example, the carbon footprint. So a lot of them, for example, adopting a new type of fuel, renewable energy to run public transportation, buses, and what have you. And that again is a concerted effort to ensure that we have a less of a carbon footprint. We ourselves have given an indication. We've made a sort of, the word is not agreement, but we have said that we will by 2030 reduce our carbon output by 30%.
All right. Hold that thought. We'll discuss how we get there after the break. Welcome back. You're watching For the Record. Now, we were talking about that climate change is real. It's real for us. It's real for, as the people in Florida and the Caribbean have found out. But there are those that, we're talking about how we reached our commitments in reducing greenhouse gases. And there are those that said, oh, no, the Pacific and Fiji is just after those adaptation funds. But Fiji, those adaptation funds are something that is part of dealing with climate change, aren't they?
Look, there was a commitment made by numerous countries to contribute a certain level of funding to meet the challenges of climate change. And the funding that was made available was for two particular aspects. One was what they call the mitigation, funds for mitigation, the other was adaptation. In fact, the funds made available for mitigation was a lot higher than the funds made available for
adaptation. So can you just explain mitigation, what does that do?
So mitigation is, for example, how you may actually reduce your carbon footprint. So, for example, you may have funds available for the adoption of new technology. A factory may be putting out a lot of gas, carbon. So you put new technology that reduces the carbon output of that. Right. That's a very classic example of mitigation.
And adaptation?
Adaptation is when you're actually trying to adapt to the climatic event itself. So, for example, adaptation would be building a seawall. That's adaptation. So that's how, in very simple ways, you can actually distinguish. But the point is that a lot of the less developed countries or developing countries and countries like island states had a huge gripe saying that there should be more funds made available for adaptation.
Because they're already feeling the effects of this.
Yeah, and also most of the countries like in the Pacific, we don't, for example, have large factories and what have you. And our carbon footprint in any case is negligible. We're quite low. So that was a sort of huge debate going on in that area, where now we're seeing a bit more of a shift to adaptation. But believe you me, it's not very easy to get those funds. You actually have to jump through a number of loops. So there are organizations...
Has Fiji managed to get some of these funds?
We got our first one, as was publicly announced, was through the Water Authority of Fiji, through the ADB. We got some green climate funds towards the water and sewage systems in the Suvarnasori corridor, because part of the climatic effect issue is also accessibility to water. So we managed to get about $32 million US dollars as a grant fund, adaptation funds for this water sewage system. That's a 4 or 5 year program They'll be, you know, rolled over 4 or 5 years.
And I'm seeing for Vunindongoloa, which you've mentioned, one of the villages that's affected had to be replaced. The cost of 30 homes that had to be built was around 15,000. So these are the costs that we bear.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something born out of budget.
Yeah.
There was some technical assistance, yes, but we have to. I mean, for example, there's another 40 villages that have been identified that are under threat.
So has government been able to put a monetary value on the effects of climate change so far on the country?
We cannot give you some definite figures. I mean, because when you say, well, what's the effect of climate change, I mean, do we take into account the damage caused by Winston?
Like the loss and damages that we...
Yeah, I mean, no. For example, the assessment that was done by the EU, Australian Foreign Affairs, a couple of other partners, World Bank, etc., that the cost of Cyclone Winston was in excess of $1.3 billion towards our GDP, nearly wiping off a third of our GDP. So that's quite significant. You know, because the thing is, when you have such an event, your water sewage system goes, your water system goes, your roads go, your bridges go, your jetties go. They're all, you know, they're quite expensive things
you
to rebuild.
almost have to restart the button.
And sorry, and also the other point is this. You have to be able to build back better, because you have to then cater for wind speeds that may well be stronger. Many of the schools, for example, that we're building in the $170 million program, a lot of people say, why hasn't it been built, you know, back so quickly? We actually have to build it to make sure that next time a cyclone comes at a particular speed or category, it does not get blown away. It has to be able to withstand that. Otherwise, you'll be just building every year gets blown the following year. What's the point of that? You're throwing good money down the drain.
All right. So what is Fiji's commitment on how it intends to address the climate change? That you said it's a before the break we talked about our commitment to hit some targets.
Well, you know, I was talking about our commitment in respect of reducing our own carbon footprint. So, for example, as you know, next example is our need to and want to be able to provide more energy sources that do not come from fossil fuels. We spend over $1 billion in Fiji buying fuel from offshore.
Diesel,
your petrol and what have you. So one of the ways, for example, that we do use this diesel is, for example, in Lambasa or even a place like Savu Savu, the electricity that people get there comes from a diesel generator, diesel-run generator. So if we can get more renewable sources of energy to supply that electricity, then we won't have to buy the fuel, then we don't have much of a carbon footprint coming from that particular source. This is why we talk about renewable energy, and FEA has got this program that, you know, in a few years' time, at least 95% of all the energy requirements, and hopefully soon thereafter, 100% of it, will actually come from renewable energy sources. Monasavu, of course, is a classic example. You know, we don't actually burn diesel.
Brings me to a tangible one that people can identify. We have, what people say, more cars in our country today, emitting more, you know, more emissions. So how does your efforts towards climate change, mitigation things, match with the fact that we are having more cars on our roads at the moment?
More cars?
Yeah, more vehicles.
Oh, more cars. Sorry, I thought you said more cows. I was going to say our cow population isn't that high at all, actually.
No, but the vehicles. I mean,
look, I mean, this is, again, you see, this is a classic example of how you need to be able to juxtapose what people's requirements are now and looking into the future.
Right.
Yes. You know, because the country's wealth has increased, our GDP is a lot bigger now than what it used to be, and obviously inequality in Fiji has dropped. All of these things are interrelated. Because inequality has dropped in Fiji as measured internationally, more people are having access to funds they did not have before. So when people climb up the social ladder, they want to buy their car. You know, parents feel proud that their son or daughter has bought the first car.
Because I mean, climate, it's become it's a lifestyle thing, climate change.
So we, for example, reduced zero-rated duty on hybrid cars. If you now buy, for example, non-hybrid cars, the duty was higher. Now, if you buy a bigger vehicle that's, you know, petrol run purely, and if it's above a particular engine size, 2,500 cc, 3,000 cc, we pay additional money. That's to discourage people from actually buying engines that size.
Right.
So they reduce that.
They're calling me to go to break, but very quickly, what about government? Are you willing to change the lifestyle? Would government be willing to get hybrid cars instead of some of the cars?
Let's come back from the break and I'll tell you. It's a good story to tell.
Right. You're watching For the Record. We'll be right back. Welcome back to For the Record. Now, before the break, we were talking about it's a lifestyle issue. People are buying more cars, and that, that's a balance we have to strike in terms of, well, we all want to live a better lifestyle, but we also have to mind our carbon footprints. So let's talk about government, for instance.
Yep.
And what is it doing? What concrete tangible actions are you doing to reduce your own carbon footprint?
Okay, if I could just finish the line of thought that I had regarding motor vehicles, etc. So you have more people buying motor vehicles. So the fact of the matter, though, is we need to be able to think of creative ways as to how do we get more people. Yes, they may have the vehicle. They want to drive it. We want them to actually drive it perhaps on the weekends, but not during the weekdays when they come to work. So what do? We actually have to get them on public transportation. Now, many people would argue that in Fiji, public transportation, which is generally through the omnibuses or the big buses, is not very attractive. And also we have a social issue regarding that. You would not find people wearing suits.
You don't want to be seen on the bus.
Yeah, you don't find people wearing suits on a public bus in Fiji. But the same person will wear a suit and catch a bus in Sydney, catch a train in Sydney, catch a ferry in Sydney. So if you see in the budget, one of the things we have done, we have said that small bus companies that have gross turnover less than $1.5 million, they can bring in nice buses at no duty at all. If they go and borrow money to bring in new buses or buy new buses, the interest rate they will pay will be 5% or less. That's to encourage them, you see, because the idea is that once you improve the quality of the buses...
Yeah, you get more comfortable buses.
But we've got, for example, Nasinu to Suva, Nosori to Suva, very heavily populated corridor. We're doing 4-lane roads. Once you get good quality buses, then you can, for example, have what we call dedicated bus lanes. You go to Sydney of dedicated bus lanes in the peak hour period. So we can, for example, reserve the left lane, for example, for all the buses only between, say, 6:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. So then you will say, hang on, why should I drive to work? Because if I drive to work, it takes me an hour and a half from Nakasi.
You avoid the traffic jam, parking
So
issues.
I can go in the bus, nice bus, no tarpaulin as window, but I can get there, it's nicely air conditioned, I can get to work, no hassle, less stress, come back to work. Then maybe in the evening when I go out, I can take my car.
Right.
That's how you reduce your carbon footprint. So these are the kind of measures we are taking, putting in place. And that's the plan for doing this. This is why we're doing all of this. So a lot of the things, in fact, we identified a couple of years ago. We know that we have to do certain things now, and in 2 years' time we'll be able to change policies to get people to reduce their carbon footprint. That's the way that we do it. Government, of course, is encouraging, for example, its own state-owned enterprises to, for example, put up more solar panels, use less of electricity generated through diesel. So all of those kind of measures we are.
So this is happening?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you have AFL now that recently received a certification in respect of having low carbon output at the airport.
So that's a active push to government ministries now to start to look at
we have the policy. Yes.
Let's talk about this. Achievement. It's an honor of becoming the president of COP23. So how did Fiji achieve this, to become the president of a very high profile but also very difficult negotiations that's going to be taking place, that has taken place today and going to take place again. And it's a major undertaking where some would say the real decisions are being made by the bigger countries and Fiji sitting there.
Well, firstly, let me sort of say that Fiji was actually asked to become the president. In fact, USA was one of the leading countries that actually asked Fiji and encouraged Fiji to take up the presidency. And we did take up the challenge. It obviously was an honor, but it also has brought about the ability to bring a particular perspective to the COP event. And that is never before in the history of the COP events. We have now, this is the 23rd one, has a small island state being given the presidency. So you bring a particular perspective that has not been brought to the fore through the presidency. So that's one great opportunity. Secondly, obviously, it has, as shown in the speeches of the Honourable Prime Minister, it has also shown, symbolically is very powerful, that we have a small island state like Fiji collaborating with Germany, which is a highly industrialized country. So whilst we have the presidency, it is actually being hosted in Germany. Obviously very grateful to the German government and the German people for hosting of this. They're bearing the cost of that, the actual hosting of it. Fiji physically cannot host it, So it symbolizes a great collaboration that is, essentially critical and essential to demonstrate to the rest of the world and show how that level of collaboration. So that, I think, is very significant in terms of the messaging. We are not necessarily just some bystander that's going to be there and just be sitting in the chair. Of course not. I mean, the Honourable Prime Minister has shown this through his work. I mean, very, very active. He's actually taking the message to a lot of leaders. A lot of leaders are actually now being convinced.
He has described it as the most important.
He is engaged with, for example, the governor of California, which is the sixth largest economy in the world. Various other people have become engaged with this.
I saw his speech in the UN General Assembly where he has described the role as the most important any Fijian leader has undertaken.
Absolutely. Without doubt. I mean, I think it's in a way quite trite to actually quote it because it is the most significant leadership role any Fijian leader has undertaken.
So, before we go to the break, what will be our key priorities? What is the Prime Minister aiming for? I mean, we are part of the small alliance of small island states that, he'll be sort of at the top of and try to spread. What will be he aiming to achieve?
I think that people need to understand that, as I said, the Paris Agreement is now the international agreement. We were the first country to actually lodge the instruments. We're the first ones to ratify it. So obviously that is quite significant in itself and quite.
So we already saw some leadership in that area.
Absolutely, unbeknownst to us that we're going to get this presidency. So maybe the writing is in the stars, but the fact of the matter is that our job is to ensure that we still stay on track on the Paris Agreement. As you know, it comes into effect in 2020, and we obviously do not want any backpedaling on that. In fact, if anything, we want the 1.5 degree actually implemented.
So just the Paris Agreement is currently hovering around 2 or at 2, just below 2 degrees. We don't get too technical, but people want to, Fijians want to move it down to at least closer to 1.5.
Yes, I mean, but the fact of the matter is the Paris Agreement, there are numerous clauses that needs to be implemented. And we need to have some level of agreement in respect of the implementation itself, the practicalities of it. That's really what is at play. Of course, some people have said to us, well, everything is now up in the air because of the position that the Trump administration has taken. But as we've said, the Honourable Prime Minister has said, we're reaching out. We can also see that there is some room, obviously,
for engagement. We'll have to leave it at that thought. Yeah. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to For the Record. We're discussing climate change and Fiji's positions at the local and international arena. Now, the PM has stated in his General Assembly speech that he wants to build and mobilize a grand coalition of climate action leadership at every level of government. So how is he going around achieving that?
Well, as you know that we have a number of stakeholders that are actually involved in the climate action. It's not just governments per se, but it's also numerous other stakeholders. You have corporates, you have private sector, you have the civil society, you have NGOs, you have also regional and state governments. For example, what we talked about, the governor of California being involved quite actively, and he being on the panel of advisors for the Honourable Prime Minister. I mean, he is the governor of the sixth largest economy in the world. So
and even though the U.S. government may have been holding back, they are a bit more active in
absolutely
in the actions on
so you can also similarly you have a number of private actors, even companies, that actually see a future in going green, so to speak, and they have actually adopted those policies because for them it's not just a question of being a good corporate citizen. For them it makes commercial sense too. So in fact, a lot of the technology that previously was used and has a larger carbon footprint, if you actually adopt new technologies, your carbon footprint not only reduces, but actually creates a lot of efficiency. It provides longevity to your actual business processes and your operations within the factories and what have you. And a lot of people get attracted to it. So there's also a high level of consciousness, internationally speaking. So people want to say, let's buy that product because you've got a less of a carbon footprint.
So working with people who want to do something, yeah?
Absolutely.
And I've been to these COP meetings in the past. It's one big, long negotiation going right into the night at times. And a key issue for Fiji being the president, the first time a small island state has held a position, is managing the different agendas and maneuvers of the bigger developed nations. You know, those that people say are setting where the negotiations are going, and some even, I would argue, coalition of the self is looking out for their own self-interest. Some would argue. What would be some of the strategies and tactics that Fiji is looking to engage in to do something a bit different?
So I don't know, Stanley, which COP you went to, but I think once the Paris Agreement was achieved and reached, that's changed the ball game.
Yeah, there was one in Cancun, right, in Mexico.
Yeah, so I mean that's when they were still they were taking the baby steps or crawling.
So now it's about how to implement it.
It's about the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So yes, but it would be of course foolish for us to say that there aren't sort of issues that people will necessarily not agree on, or there won't be any disagreements. But the reality of the matter is that it's a different ball game altogether. Cancun is very different to Paris Agreement now. So it's again about the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Of course, we have the pre-COP in Fiji in Denarau, as I mentioned, 16th, 17th, and 18th. And it's really a barometer, if you like, to measure what are some of the political issues that one may need to face, but also the ability and hopefully to iron out any of those political issues, because as you know, in the Paris Agreement, because it's implementation, you get more into the technical aspects of it. So sometimes, technical matters can
be ironed down next month?
Or sometimes technical matters actually can be impacted about political positions. And as we were told by some people who've been in these, many of these talks and negotiations before, that sometimes it's what may be driving a particular country or particular region's agenda may be something completely different to do with climate change. It may be about some regional power play. So, we obviously want to rise above that. And again, you see, this is the advantage that Fiji has, because Fiji is not one of those countries that has large geopolitical ambitions. It's not sort of a major player in some sort of, international warfare or regional warfare. So we come as a very neutral...
We want action to be done.
Yeah, but we come as a very neutral party. We come from Fiji.
Our time is up. Just give me 30 seconds. What would be a great outcome?
The great outcome, of course, would be, from a global perspective, is to bring everybody together along the Paris Agreement agenda and have the implementation, work out of the rule book and implementation rules for 2020, and to hand over successfully in 2019 to the next presidency, which is going to go to Poland. And of course, to be able to, for Fiji, get that level of focus and highlight the issues pertaining to us and the other Pacific Island countries, and to be able to tap into the resources that are available throughout the world.
A big few weeks ahead. Mr. Said Kayum, thank you for joining me on the show.
Thank you. Okay.
Right, that was For the Record for the evening. We hope you enjoyed the show and will join us again next Sunday. Join Nemanin Delembetiki next with his My Say from me and the team. Good night.